We've all heard of the Blair Witch, right? From the Blair Witch Project. It was the most groundbreaking horror movie to come out in the 1990s. Why? Because no one had ever done a found footage documentary style horror movie before. And that's exactly what Eduardo Sanchez and Daniel Myrick did. But it was more than that. So much more. Hey, I'm April, and we are on a witchful journey. I'm looking forward to sharing this story with you. But first, let's see what message the tarot cards have today. Today's card is the Ace of Swords from the 88 Gemstones Tarot deck. The appearance of this card suggests a breakthrough of some kind is about to occur. It's about overcoming obstacles, effective communication, new chapters, and the importance of effort. Swords in tarot generally represent intellect, and aces represent the beginning of something. The card in this deck also depicts a golden crown and a laurel wreath, pointing to success. What will allow us to have this breakthrough, this success, is a moment where we're able to see something through a new lens. Sometimes that'll look like finally seeing through the smoke and mirrors, seeing the truth because you've developed the superpower of X-ray vision. Sometimes it'll look like a deep intellectual discussion that will open your eyes to a perspective that you hadn't considered previously. Along the same lines, it could also just be an open, clear, and honest discussion between you and your partner about an issue that needed to be confronted and overcome so that your relationship can grow stronger. Since aces represent the beginning of something new, it could also take the form of a new job or a new environment that allows you endless opportunities to expand your mind and your skills. This is yet another time where the card kind of ties in pretty well with our topic, because today I want to use a little bit of that X-ray vision. Now, I'm fairly certain that most people have already seen the 1999 film, The Blair Witch Project. However, if you haven't seen it or any of the other movies directly related to that one, I warn you now that listening to this episode may spoil the whole thing. Sorry. So, January of 1999, The Blair Witch Project was presented at the Sundance Film Festival at midnight. It was enough of a hit that Artisan Entertainment bought the rights not long after, and the movie aired in theaters nationwide in June of 1999. The draw was that no one knew for sure if the found footage was real or not. It showed 3 film students, Heather Donahue, Michael Williams, and Joshua Leonard, traveling to a small town in Maryland in 1994 to collect documentary footage about the Blair Witch and the legends surrounding the story. They trek into the Black Hills Forest near Burkittsville, and that's where their project takes a terrifying turn. See, during their interviews in Burkittsville, they had heard stories of things that were potentially connected to the Blair Witch, and went in search of these places. Stories like a man named Rustin Parr lived in the woods in the Black Hills Forest in the early 1900s, until 1941, when it was discovered that Parr had abducted 8 children and murdered 7 of them in his basement. He claimed an old woman told him to do it. Another story they heard was that of Robin Weaver, who disappeared in 1886 and eventually returned home speaking of a woman whose feet didn't touch the ground. They were also told a story about Coffin Rock, where 5 men had been found slaughtered, their bodies covered in strange symbols. Their bodies also mysteriously disappeared after being found. This story is in connection to the Robin Weaver story because those men were part of her original search party. This movie is also where the iconic stick figures in the trees appeared, and it was suggested that the Blair Witch was the one leaving them. The story of the Blair Witch herself was that her name was Ellie Kedward. She had sailed to Maryland from England in 1769 and had been banished from the town of Blair in the winter of 1785, after being accused of witchcraft. She was caught pricking the fingers of children, a form of bloodletting that was common before the 19th century, and was taken into the woods, tied to a tree, and left to die. The following year, her accusers were found dismembered, and some of the town's children had gone missing. The townspeople were so terrified that they all fled Blair Township. It was abandoned for 40 years, before being renamed Burkittsville by its new inhabitants. Quite the legend. The movie ends with a chilling scene and the implication that none of the 3 students made it out of that forest. In July of 1999, a month after the Blair Witch Project made it to the big screens, the first of 2 television specials were released. The first was called Curse of the Blair Witch. This 44-minute special piggybacked off of the original movie. It included interviews with friends and family of Heather, Joshua, and Matthew, news reports, interviews with locals, and an interview with a man named Lucan Johnson of Mystic Occurrences, who explained a little about Wicca, paganism, and witchcraft. And it references a rare book called The Blair Witch Cult. There's also mention of a young girl named Eileen Treacle, and a story about how a ghostly hand came up out of the water in the creek she was standing in and grabbed her. She drowned in the creek and was never found. Toward the end of this special, they button it up nicely by suggesting that every 60 years since Ellie Kedward's death, something happens, using the story of Rustin Parr as an example. They also explain about the excavation of a stone wall in 1995 for anthropological purposes, where a backpack containing the film for the Blair Witch Project was found. Hence, found footage. The stone wall they talked about is suggested to be the foundation of Rustin Parr's home. The second special released in 1999 was called Sticks and Stones, an exploration of the Blair Witch legend. This special was roughly half an hour long, with what appeared to be TV news reports, interviews with private investigators, interviews with police, and it shows old-looking written letters and reiterates the legend of Ellie Kedward, Eileen Treacle, Robin Weaver, and Coffin Rock, and Rustin Parr. It's almost a reworking of the TV special titled Curse of the Blair Witch, with slightly more detail, suggesting that Heather Donahue's mother had hired investigators to go looking for her. The following year, in October 2000, a sequel hit theaters. It was called Book of Shadows, Blair Witch 2. This one is filmed in a more traditional horror movie style and builds on the first movie to say, this is what has happened since then. It takes the fact that Burkittsville was swarmed by fans of the first film and runs with it, reiterating the lore and allowing for the question of, is the Blair Witch real? It included cameo roles from residents who explained how the town was affected by the release of the first movie. And of course, in this movie, strange things happen in the woods to a group of lore hunters, and it takes a messy turn. There were 2 more TV specials that aired the same year. The first was called The Massacre of the Burkittsville 7, The Blair Witch Legacy. This one is about 40 minutes long. It questions the stories and legends and suggests that everything surrounding the Blair Witch Project is a hoax. It focuses more, of course, on the Rustin Parr story, elaborating on it with interviews, footage, photographs, and writings, but also suggesting that there was something maybe a little deeper going on with that particular story. The second TV special to air in 2000 was called Shadow of the Blair Witch. This special is about a man named Jeff Patterson, who is said to be involved in part of the Blair Witch legend. According to the special, Jeff murdered a group of people that he took into the woods near Burkittsville. The movie Book of Shadows, Blair Witch 2 is supposedly based off of what Jeff Patterson did. 16 years later, in 2016, another movie was released. That one is simply named Blair Witch. It's filmed primarily from the perspective of the characters, or rather, their head-mounted cameras, with a smattering of footage from a drone and some handheld camera action. In this movie, Heather Donahue's brother, James, is alerted to potential footage found by someone in the Burkittsville area and he brings his friends along to meet up with the couple who found the footage and to search for Heather in the Black Hills forest. The lure is reiterated yet again and also built upon, and of course, strange and terrifying things happen in the woods. But this time, you catch a couple of glimpses of a disturbingly lanky creature. No one survives. So let's activate that truth-finding X-ray vision, rewind the clock, and pick this apart. The year is 1991. Eduardo Sanchez and Daniel Myrick are film students at the University of Central Florida. They're batting around ideas for a horror movie, and they discover that documentary-style footage has the potential to be so much creepier than the traditional style of filming. Myrick has an image in his head of these primitive-looking stick figures hanging from trees, which he's imagined since childhood. The two incorporate these stick figures into their plans for their movie. By 1993, it develops into a 35-page outline with minimal planned dialogue. The majority of the dialogue is meant to be improvised. The folklore was created, and casting and filming began in 1997. The ad that went out asked for actors that were good at improv, and it warned that the roles would not only be extremely challenging, but the film would also be shot under very difficult conditions. Improv and camping required, it said. The main cast came down to Heather Donahue, Michael Williams, and Joshua Leonard, who basically played fictional versions of themselves. Yep, they used their real names for the movie. The crew all arrived in Burkittsville, Maryland in the fall of 1997 and took a few days to get a layout of the town. Actual filming for the movie took all of 8 days, with about 20 hours of film total. When the casting call advertisement said the film would be shot in difficult conditions, it wasn't kidding. None of the main cast for the movie had any extensive experience, and the filmmaking experience was definitely intense. Prior to filming, the directors went into the woods to map out where everything would take place. The actors were given a crash course on how to use the filming equipment, given some survival tools, and a GPS. After getting the footage from within the town of Burkittsville itself, they were sent out into the woods of probably the Great Seneca Stream Valley Park to film the movie on their own. Heather Donahue was the only one given the full rundown of the entire Blair Witch legend. None of the actors were given a real script, because there wasn't one, and over the 8 days of filming, the actors were guided through the forest with GPS waypoints given to them by the directors. Each GPS waypoint led the actors to a milk crate marked by a flag. That would indicate that it was time to set up camp, or that it was a spot where an event in the movie would take place. The milk crates contained a ration of food and film canisters for each of the actors and included their individual directing instructions. The actors were told not to share their notes with anyone else, the reason being that their genuine reactions had to be caught on film. Moments like the morning that Josh goes missing in the movie, the other actors weren't made aware of that beforehand. He had been told to wait for them to fall asleep and sneak out. The noises made during the night were made by the directors and their groups in order to add to the intensity of the final product. Even the approach to the house at the end was genuine, although filming inside the house was too complicated to wing it, so that was the only part that was shot more traditionally. In 1998, the filmmakers created a website pretending that the entire Blair Witch project was real, as a sort of promotional marketing campaign. Their website included missing posters for each of the actors, short biographies for each actor, a timeline for the mythology involved in making the movie, and snippets of the film itself, claiming that it was found footage. The idea was to make it seem as if Heather's mother had hired someone to look into the disappearance of the 3 actors. By the time the film was presented at the Sundance Film Festival, there were already some murmurs about it. And to add to the illusion, missing flyers were distributed at the film festival. Artisan Entertainment saw how their marketing campaign, because that's what they were doing, was working and chose to expand on that. So by the time Artisan Entertainment had bought the rights and released the movie nationwide, There was even more mythology added to create the illusion that the movie could potentially be real. The actors themselves were told to lay low for a while, and there were even faux police reports and newsreel-style footage and interviews and footage of faux search parties and talk of this rare book. That rare book was called the Blair Witch Cult. The claim was that the book was written in the 1800s. In reality, the book was created for the production of the movie by Julia Fair of Haxton Films. The book is real. The stuff in it, not so much. What is Haxton Films? It's the film production company that was created by Sanchez, Myrick, and a handful of others. The name was inspired by a 1922 Swedish-Danish silent horror called Haxton. It was a documentary-style film that supposedly charts the historical roots and superstitions of witchcraft from the Middle Ages up through to the 20th century. It was released in the US in 1968 under the name Witchcraft Through the Ages. I haven't seen it yet, but I plan to sit down and watch it sometime. You know, nerdy witch and all that. Like I said earlier, the stick figures, or twanas, that make an appearance in pretty much all of the movies, those were created in the mind of co-director Daniel Myrick. The Blair Witch herself? Completely fabricated. There was no Ellie Kedward. Burkittsville Historical Society may have her included among the list of witches due to the vast amount of attention the town got after the original movie, but they'll still note that the legend is false. The name Ellie Kedward was created as a near anagram for Sir Edward Kelly, also known as Edward Talbot. He was a 16th century English Renaissance occultist and scryer, or crystal gazer, who worked on magical investigations with a man named John Dee. Sir Edward Kelly claimed that he could see spirits and angels in mirrors, and that he possessed the ability to transmute base metals into gold. The legend created around Ellie Kedward was based on probably a combination of legends, the main legend being that of Moll Dyer. The legend of Moll Dyer isn't a Burkittsville legend, though. It belongs to Leonardtown, Maryland, 2 hours away. Moll Dyer was believed to have been a healer. See, the summer of 1696 wasn't a good summer for crops. There was a particularly bad drought. The townspeople suspected Moll Dyer of having something to do with that, but they let it be. Until 6 months later, in February of 1697, when a flu epidemic swept through the town. The people blamed Dyer, accusing her of witchcraft. They didn't allow her to have a trial, though. Instead, they took it upon themselves to set fire to her home. Dyer managed to flee to the woods, but ended up dying of exposure atop a large rock. She was found there a few days later by a couple of boys searching for lost livestock. According to the legend, you can still see the imprints of where her knees and her hands rested on the rock. And in 1968, a writer named Philip H. Love read about the legend and went in search of the rock, eventually finding it at the edge of a ravine. Sometime in the 1970s, the rock was moved to Leonardtown's Old Jail Museum in the town square. In 2021, Leonardtown's mayor proclaimed February 26th as Moll Dyer Day, and the rock was moved to Tudor Hall Manor, where it now sits atop a platform and has a protective covering to shield it from the elements. Visitors to the spot leave small gifts and trinkets in honor of Dyer, and some report feeling uneasy or random aches and pains when they're near the rock. It's also said that camera equipment has a tendency to malfunction near the rock. A look at county records doesn't bring anything up for a Moll Dyer, but it does show a Mary Dyer, who was born in England and sailed to the West Indies in 1669 to work as a servant at a sugar plantation before eventually sailing north to Maryland. A couple of other mentions of witches in connection to Maryland that could have added to the inspiration of the Blair Witch legend include a Mary Lee, who boarded the Charity of London in 1654, bound for Maryland. She never actually made it to shore, though. Sometime during the voyage, Mary was blamed for the weakening of the ship that resulted from numerous storms coming across their path. She may have also been accused of conjuring up the storms. Instead of allowing Mary a trial, the sailors took action. They searched for her devil markings, which at the time were proof of being a witch, and could have been anything from a pimple to a raised birthmark. And upon finding their proof, she was hanged, and they dumped her body and belongings into the sea. Rebecca Fowler was accused, found guilty, and hanged for witchcraft in 1685. Her accusers claimed that she spoke evil incantations that left them weak, ill, and injured. There's only one actual name among her accusers in her trial, and the evidence against her wasn't made public. Yet somehow it was still concluded that she truly was guilty of, and I quote, being led by instigation of the devil. There are many others, but I think I'll leave them for another episode. So if the Blair Witch isn't real, then what about Rustin Parr? Well, he wasn't real either. More fabrication. The character of Rustin Parr has notes of a combination of serial killers, namely Ed Gein, John Wayne Gacy, and Son of Sam. And the name Rustin Parr is another near anagram for Rasputin. If you've ever seen the animated kids movie Anastasia, then you have an idea of who Rasputin was. But let's talk about him. Grigory Rasputin, born in Siberia on January 21st, 1869, was a self-proclaimed mystic and faith healer. We don't know a whole lot about him until about 1905, after he'd made his way to Russia, grown his following, and met the imperial family. The family of Nicholas II, the last Tsar of Russia. Rasputin managed to befriend the imperial family, and in 1906 he became the personal faith healer for the Romanov family. You see, Nicholas and his wife Alexandra had a son, and that wouldn't normally be a reason to find themselves a faith healer, but this son suffered from hemophilia. Hemophilia is a relatively rare blood disorder that affects the blood's ability to clot properly. It's commonly referred to as the royal disease because it disproportionately affected European royal families in the 19th and 20th centuries, particularly the males that were descended from Queen Victoria. And yes, Alexei was a descendant of Queen Victoria. Nicholas and Alexandra hired Rasputin because he promised that he would be able to heal Alexei so that he could play like a normal boy. And it's said that Rasputin's influence on the Imperial Romanov family is what ultimately led to their downfall. So any searches of a man named Rustin Parr living in Maryland in the 1930s or 40s only brings up book titles and Blair Witch fandom pages. What about Mystic Occurrences and Luke and Johnson? Nope. That was created solely to sell the movie too. There was no such show called Mystic Occurrences, and Lucan Johnson's character is based on a collective interpretation of what a hippie Wiccan looked like in the early 70s. Granted, a little of what is said about Wiccans and paganism in that short video is true, so that kind of added to the impression that the Blair Witch legend was real. So, because, again, nerdy witch, I got curious about a couple of things, because I don't live in Maryland. I decided to pull up good old Google Maps and do a search. Well, a few searches. I did find that Black Hill and Black Rock both exist as mountain peaks in Maryland, and there's a Black Hill Regional Park north of Germantown, Maryland, and that includes a biker and hiker trail that's about 4.6 miles long. The flat-looking boulder referred to as Coffin Rock does exist in the Seneca Stream Valley Park, but I cannot find a single thing outside of ghost hunting sites and Blair Witch fandom that actually refers to the place as Coffin Rock. It seems that it has only been referred to by that name since the movie was released. All of these places are also not really close together at all. Okay, so at least location-wise, we have a few things that are pretty close to real. Does that mean that Blair Township was real? No, sir, it does not. Frederick County, Maryland. That's where Burkittsville is located. In the 1720s, the land in the area where Burkittsville currently sits was part of Prince George's County. Frederick County hadn't been formed yet, and was just beginning to be surveyed and patented. The area was pretty sparsely populated. And I found a receipt from Prince George's County that states Dawson's Purchase, 140 acres, surveyed for Thomas Dawson on the 14th of May, 1741, passed the 29th of September, 1741, and patented to Thomas Dawson on the 23rd of November, 1741. Dawson's Purchase is the first mention of anyone or anything actually being in the spot where Burkittsville sits today. In 1789, a portion of Dawson's Purchase was acquired by Peter Gaver, who put a 197-acre farm right where the western part of Burkittsville sits. Henry Burkitt bought the land right next to Peter Gaver's farm in 1810, and a man named Major Joshua Harley also bought land in the area. Harley opened up a post office that was eventually named Burkittsville Post Office by about 1825. Burkittsville grew from there. Blair Township would have had to have existed during all of that surveying and divvying up of land, wouldn't it? Someone should have noticed if there was a whole township right under their nose. Again, outside of fandom pages and the extensive amount of sites, books, and TV specials specifically designed to market the movies, there's nothing to suggest that Blair Township ever existed. And despite the attention that the original Blair Witch Project got, none of the three actors made it big in comparison to the movie. Heather Donahue continued acting for another 8 or 9 years, retired, and is now a grower. Yes, she's still alive. Michael Williams appeared to be still acting, small-time stuff. Also still alive. And Joshua Leonard has been involved in a number of indie movies and TV series, whether he's acting, writing, or directing. Also still alive. One thing that I do want to note is that Burkittsville, Maryland sits along the eastern base of South Mountain, which is part of the Appalachian Mountains. While the story of the Blair Witch is just that, a story, that doesn't mean a whole lot when you take into account the long history of lore involving those mountains. But we'll talk about that at another time. Probably multiple times. There is one last interesting bit of information that I want to share with you today. Throughout history, and by that I mean at least the last couple thousand years or so, there's been this aversion to witches and witchcraft, even when there was no harm actually being done to anyone. What I find odd are that there are instructions for things like how to keep a witch from entering your home. One set of instructions are as follows. To prevent a witch from entering a home or cursing the inhabitants, you must gather a bottle, some pins, nails, needles, claws, wood splinters, anything sharp, and urine. Seal the bottle and bury the bottle under the entrance to the home. Bury it bottom side up to reverse black magic. There are even notations of the urine being the most important part of the bottle's ingredients because that is what repels the evil back unto the sender. Huh? Babe, that's a spell. That be a protection spell. That's witchcraft. I don't get it. Using magic again, whatever. Anyway, there are archaeological digs where these witch bottles, as they're called, have been dug up. Most of them are in England, but one such bottle was found in 1976 in the Governor Prince State Park in Essington, Pennsylvania, during an excavation. Another set of instructions that have been documented as a way to deter a witch was to lay broomsticks across your threshold. It was thought that witches wouldn't be able to cross the threshold because they would have to stop and count the bristles on the broom first. And that's all I've got for you guys today. Thanks so much for tuning in and hanging out with me. Next time, we'll talk about the Wheel of the Year and Beltane, which is coming up soon. If you enjoyed this episode and don't want to miss out on future episodes, hit those like and follow buttons. It's super helpful in letting me know what topics you guys find interesting. For now, you can find me on Facebook, Witchful Journey Podcast, on Instagram at _Witchful_Journey. And for those of you that need a reminder, the underscores are the spaces with the little lines at the bottom. and on BlueSky at awitchfuljourney.bsky.social. I really enjoy hearing from you guys, so if you pop in on my socials, say hi. Or you can email me at awitchfuljourney@gmail.com. I'm April, and we are on a witchful journey.